Sporting Clube Portugal has a rich history, especially when it comes to producing world-class athletes. Throughout history, the club has become notorious for igniting the careers of players like Futre, Figo, Ronaldo, and more recently, Rafael Leão. But despite that, Sporting fell behind their biggest rivals, and during my childhood, I remember seeing them involved in more outlandish controversies than I ever saw them winning league titles. So today, I decided to take a deep dive into the biggest controversy of them all. In this video, I'll explain how Sporting's training ground was once invaded by their own ultras, how the players were beaten down mercilessly, and the consequences it brought not only to Sporting, but to Portuguese football as a whole. So first, let me give you some context. In order to properly introduce this dark day from 2018, I gotta take you with me back in time to 2011. Sporting was going through a massive crisis. It had been almost 10 years since the Lions had won the league, and the latest seasons all indicated that the drought could go on for much longer. In 2010, Sporting finished in 4th place. In 2011, we saw a slight upgrade, but the Lions were nowhere near the title picture, even though they changed their manager 4 times in little more than a year. The fans wanted change. They wanted fresh blood with an assertive attitude, someone willing to stand up against Benfica and Porto. They wanted to stop being seen as a joke, and everything they envisioned was personified in Bruno de Carvalho. He was brash, he was charismatic, but above all, he loved Sporting and didn't see it as just another opportunity to hold a position of power like his old head opponents did. But in the end, he didn't win. You see, there's an old rule in some football club elections, including Sporting's, that gave older members more votes than the newer ones to guarantee a fair election. Godinho Lopes knew that it didn't appeal to the younger fans nearly as much as Bruno did, but that wasn't the problem. If he just asserted his dominance and cultivated even more popularity among the older Sporting fans, he would have the elections in the bag. It was a smart move, but even so, Godinho struggled to win, and many claim to this day that the elections were stolen. The results were only revealed around 6 AM the next day, and there were many rumors of mistakes when counting the votes. Either way, Godinho won, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. He won by a very small margin, but he was now the main responsible for taking Sporting out of the trenches and back into the limelight. Well, I can't say his tenure started off badly. Godinho did attract some of the most promising players in international football, from about 6 to 8 years ago. Overpriced foreigners with no connection whatsoever to the league, players who were extremely injury prone or already starting their downfall. In 2011 and 2012, Sporting brought in so many bizarre names that if I still made top 10 videos, I could probably just fill them with Sporting transfers from that period and call it a day. Onieu, Bodinov, Refren, Pularus, Rabiat, Pranich, players with respectable resumes, but clearly past their best and way out of Sporting's financial possibilities. There were also some pretty underrated gems like Steen Skars, Wolfswinkel or Capel during that period, but they were more streets won't forget type of players than serial winners capable of carrying Sporting. And if things were bad before Godinho, well, they only got worse. In his first full season as president, Godinho Lopes saw Sporting go back to a humiliating 4th place finish in 11-12 before being forced to step down when the club was closer to getting relegated than they were to winning the title in 12-13. This time, the solution was evident to everyone. Bruno de Carvalho needed to make Sporting great again. So, without much surprise, Bruno, who had always acted almost as an opposing political party to Godinho Lopes' 2-year leadership, saw his persistence pay off, with Sporting members giving him the honor and responsibility of revolutionizing the club. Sporting was in really rough shape. The club was 430 million euros in debt, the squad was merely a group of random players patched together from the ideas of several different managers, and the club was in serious risk of finishing in their worst league position ever. With 2 months in charge, Bruno couldn't prevent Sporting's humiliating 7th place finish, not even with his intense presence on the touchline. But over the next 2 years, Bruno renegotiated the club's debt and saved Sporting from bankruptcy. Invested in infrastructure for Sporting's other sports, most notably when he built the João Rocha Sports Complex, and above all, he resurrected the love and pride of being a Sporting fan. I mean, at the beginning of the 2010s, Sporting was a joke. You can call me biased and be pissed off all you want, but that's the truth. No one took Sporting seriously. Porto and Benfica only had themselves as true rivals at the time. Sporting was at the level of Braga, and I used to swear that Braga had a better chance of winning their first league title than Sporting ending their drought. Bruno turned that around with massive statements, like the appointment of former Benfica manager Jorge Jesus, making Alvalade Porto's toughest away trip, and most importantly, he won. He won a lot against the Giants. He made Sporting an incredible difficult opponent for clubs like Real, Dortmund or Barca. To sum it up, he made Sporting fans feel proud, which is extremely difficult when you claim to be a giant, yet you can't win the league. But that was the charm of Bruno de Carvalho. He created a sort of cult of personality at the club, where his Facebook posts were must-read literature. He would go on national TV and everyone would stop and watch him. Hell, even announced he would be a dad in the stadium with one of the most bizarre videos I've ever seen, where he compared himself to Cristiano Ronaldo in their hunger to breed little lions. Bruno also went to war with the Portuguese media and ordered Sporting fans to only consume news from the club's sources. In my eyes, this was more or less the moment when he truly began losing his mind, and some fan support as a consequence. Because let's be real, everything I've described could have been done by someone like Trump, or worse, like a South American dictator. However, at the end of the day, Sporting players tolerated him. They were his employees, and despite the apparent downward trend the club was embarking on following two disappointing seasons in 15-16 and 16-17, they still tried their best. Well, their best wasn't enough. In one of his usual angry tirades on Facebook, Bruno tore the squad apart following an elimination against Atletico in the Europa League, an away match that he didn't even personally attend. The disgruntled players were rightfully pissed about being publicly criticized in such a devastating manner, so they clapped back and collectively wrote an official statement criticizing their own presidents. They said they felt betrayed and abandoned by the one who was supposed to protect them, and Bruno, he didn't take it well. So he suspended everyone involved in that statement. Sporting was officially in a civil war, arguably even more divided than when Bruno arrived. To add more fuel to the fire, the team lost their last chance to finish second and qualify for the Champions League in one of the most uninspired performances of the Bruno era against Marítimo. Something needed to be done. Someone had to pay, and that's when the unthinkable happened. Around 14 Sporting Ultras marched to the Alcochete Training Complex, invaded it, and brutally beat down several players, as well as the manager at the time, Jorge Jesus, and part of his staff. They brought belts, they even threw firecrackers to the windows before beating up the squad. Since Bruno and the Ultras leader Mustafa were close, there was no way the president wasn't aware of the group's visit to Alcochete. Now, whether he knew the players would be violently assaulted is another theory. Still, I'll never forget Bruno being interviewed and claiming that if we were to blame anyone for this sad event, then it had to be the players who decided to stand up against the Ultras. Fuck me, man, who needs enemies when you have a president like that? Obviously, everyone from the board resigned. The players decided to play the upcoming final of the Portuguese Cup against major underdogs Aves, who historically beat the fragile Lions, but soon after, dozens of players submitted their formal resignation letters. Everyone was abandoning the ship except Bruno. It's like that old tale of the chief with no tribe. He became so obsessed with the club and having things go his way that he lost control and turned everyone against him. It's unfathomable how he went to the highest of highs with everyone looking at him as Sporting's savior. How he actually saved Sporting and built a solid foundation for the future, only to then let his ego tear everything apart. Rui Patrício, William Carvalho, Rafael Leão, Gelson Martins, Daniel Podense, they weren't perfect players, but they were a solid base that would inevitably earn wins on the pitch or money for the club's bank account. And they all left for free. Except Rafael Leão, but that's a whole nother story that I'll touch on in a future video, if you want of course. Bruno was eventually thrown out of the club by over 70% of voters and forbidden from ever running as president again. Ultimately, although his downfall could have signaled the death of Sporting as we knew it, the opposite ended up happening. The club's clinical director emerged as their new leader, and despite being permanently criticized for his weak communication and poor managerial appointments, he eventually hit the jackpot with Ruben Amorim as head coach and Hugo Viana as sporting director. Sporting is the most stable of the three giants in Portugal less than a decade after that incident, while Bruno is a DJ nowadays.
Bruno de Carvalho no beat.
Participates in reality shows, has divorced twice since that ordeal, but ultimately I also believe he's a bit more mentally stable. I have no doubt in my mind that Bruno loves Sporting and that he didn't become president for power or fame. I believe he thought he was doing the right thing, but the problem was that his love was toxic. And even though it hurts him, Sporting is much better off without him. Sometimes we need a revolution to spark things up, but that doesn't mean we have to live in constant chaos to thrive. Regardless, I'll always have some sympathy for Bruno. Probably because I'm not a Sporting fan, but most likely because I simply found him entertaining. He spiced up the Portuguese football sphere. He was provocative. He got people going and talking about the ludicrous shit he said all the time. I'm not sure where you're watching this, but I remember being a teenager at recess, laughing my ass off with my buddies at his posts and out of these road statements at press conferences. Nowadays, I don't find that enjoyment anymore. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's normal because football isn't supposed to be so chaotic, but fuck it, I love entertainment. And that era, with Bruno, with Pinto da Costa, with Luís Filipe Vieira, plus all the quarrels between Conceição, Jorge Jesus and Rui Vitória, will always have a special place in my heart. Either way, I want to hear from you. When were you when you found out about that violent attack in Alcochete? And if you're just finding out about it now, then let me tell you something. Portuguese football has many crazy stories like this one, and the good news is that I try to cover them all. Wanna know how a president corrupted referees with fruit and candy? Then click this video on the screen. I'll see you there.